with me today Kim Fox, who's our Director of Meetings and Incentive Travel, as well as two key people from our Client Management Division, Julie Blank and Michael Butler, who are both Director of Strategic Accounts. I would love to brag on each of them and tell you that each of them has at least 10 years experience in this space. So we have people with a lot of deep expertise that will be sharing their insights today. Also, a promotional word. Next week at the same time on Thursday, May 21st, we will be doing one more roadshow in this next normal series that focuses on roadshows. I'm intrigued by this subject because with so many of the public trade show events that are getting canceled this year, I expect that we will see an increase in private trade show events, also known as roadshows, that'll occur as local market events or regional events in the second half of the year. So please join us on May 21st. And throughout this time, you can click on that little balloon and chat in questions to us, and we will try to respond to those questions at the end of the call. Here's our agenda for today. We have 12 topics or 12 expectations. If by chance you registered and joined us last week when we talked about the next normal for incentive travel, probably, I don't know, a third of this content will repeat, a third of it is brand new, and then a third of it has been refreshed for meetings versus incentive travel. So if you joined us and a few slides seem similar, you will get new content. Also, if you did not join us last week, you could go to our website where we did a blog. There's a full transcript of that call, that webinar that has really, really great content. So with that, we're going to start with expectation one. It's just a quick look at what we have seen so far with 2020. I mentioned the IRF. They put out this study in the first 2 weeks of April that looked at incentive trips. Now we think this is, while this is incentive travel, we believe the same thing will hold true for meetings and events. So what was interesting is at first, most of the events were just postponing into Q3 or Q4, but once we got to the end of April, we saw that many more events actually postponed out of the second half of the year into 2021. From what I'm seeing in the press, that seems to be a trend for everybody. One other piece of information, one of the basis of where this reimagination series started. There's a great research paper that McKinsey and Company put out. If you've not seen that, I'd highly recommend reading it. You probably need a strong cup of coffee, but somewhere in there it talks about these 3 R's, and where I feel like we are now is in the third and fourth R. We're preparing for return, and we are also reimagining what meetings would look like going forward. So the first thing we're going to talk about is consumer psyche and how consumer psyche has been affected by this. And let's see, Michael, I think you were going to explain to us this fascinating measure called VIX Index.
It is. Good afternoon, everybody. This is one I encourage you to keep your eye on. I'm passionate about chasing the S&P these days, and I'm sure some of you are too. But this VIX Index, it's a velocity, it's a volatility indicator. So it's dubbed the fear gauge. And you can see, I guess we probably all remember where we were those few days leading up to St. Patrick's Day, where this thing kind of shot almost to the moon there, peaking at about 82.5. Good news, it's down about 30, low 30s these days, so up a little bit from last week. Shows there's definitely still some volatility. This index been trending down, but it provides a measure of market risk and investor sentiment. So it's representing a useful stock market expectation of volatility over the next 30 days. A good bearing point, again, to keep your eyes on.
Let's see, Julie?
You can get it in the Google, you can just shoot a Google VIX Index today to see what it's at currently at any time.
Yeah, so for consumer psyche, some good news that seems to be getting better and better all the time. Research is indicating an increase in traveler optimism. So, one of the recent travel consumer studies showed that 85% of travelers feel like they'll be ready to jump on a plane in 2020, and 74 will feel like an international flight would be safe this year. So this study here is another that first asked North Americans when they would consider traveling again. You see the numbers are pretty significantly high for 2020, with a total of 86% planning a trip this year. And then on the second graph, when they asked a global audience that same question, they indicated a preference for travel a little later in the year, but still 74% combined plan to travel in 2020. So I think as lockdowns are easing up and social media will start showing people enjoying vacations, we'll become quickly comfortable and willing to travel again. And a survey that came out just this week of event attendees showed that 94% of respondents specifically missed attending large conferences and trade shows. So that's really music to all of our ears, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So this was something I saw and I posted on LinkedIn, and I was amazed at the number of comments and likes that I got on it, which told me that many people felt relieved as I was to hear that airplane air is safer than you think. And what fascinated me is the graphic shows that airflow is vertical, that it goes down, rather than my fear, which was it went from the front of the plane all the way to the back of the plane, passing over everybody that had any type of bug. The other thing that I was relieved to hear is that the airplane system refreshes with external air every 2 to 3 minutes, and that we're not all breathing the same air for the next 3 hours of the flight. And then, of course, we've all probably heard about the hospital quality filters. But again, I mention this because I think it gets to the point of psyche and getting people comfortable with traveling again. 2 final slides in this area. One of the things that we've thought about is what will be extreme measures for meetings and what will be reasonable precautions. And in my opinion, while I've read about doing temperature checks before we go into general session, I feel like if we are at a point in our health system where we need to do temperature checks before going in, that people won't get on the plane and attend the meeting, or our executive team won't decide to hold the meeting. So what we think is reasonable precautions are necessary, such as things like Purell that may give people a little bit of peace of mind. Now, having said that, there may be certain industries like healthcare, if we have clinical trials going, some of those meetings might continue. And finally, in this section, while we've done this the next normal, I would summarize and say that Q2 is going to be abnormal. Q3, Q4 will be temporary changes. I saw an article that Michael Dominguez, that many of us know, he said the same thing, that we'll go through temporary changes. But then in 2021, and this is just my opinion, that I think we will largely return to the old normal, but that asterisk means there will be some changes that we continue to see, much like we saw after 9/11. So with that, for meetings, let's talk for a second about preferred destinations.
Yeah, definitely my favorite part of the meeting or event is determining where it's going to land. So I know the question we're all asking ourselves, others are asking of us, or what is the difference in safe versus perceived challenges of some of these destinations? So, as most of us sit safe and comfortable somewhere in North America, we may feel more comfortable with those destinations in our region that are highlighted green here, especially over the next year as we're starting to source meetings and events for our clients again. And conversely, the thought of destinations like China, Spain, and Italy might be hashtag a little too soon. If you're sitting on the east side of the pond, might be a converse perception you have of staying close. I was talking to a client in Cambridge, UK earlier this week, and then this morning with a supplier in Monaco, and Monaco's hotels are in phase 1 of an opening. So definitely hope's starting to float again, and definitely a perception challenge in some of these areas. So we've got the cruise ship highlighted. Obviously, they were at the brunt of the bad press at the start of this global pandemic. I track news through cruisemapper.com, just maybe a tip. They've got some great information, but it'll be really good to see when they finally come out with some we call reimagination and reform in that industry, and what how we can get past these social distancing effects and things that will help us get back to this next normal. Yeah, and then the last part of this segment is, it wasn't long ago we were pitching these second-tier destinations in places like North America for some cost savings. Cities like Nashville and the Upper Northwest and even Austin, Texas. But now that these have been maybe we all know the story of Portland, maybe being the first to report cases in this pandemic, in Seattle, and the early steps they took and the safe outcomes there, and some of these other second-tier cities. I think the best thing Austin did was not move forward with that South by Southwest, as hard as that is for our great state, just a couple days before that Vic shot up into the moon. So yeah, second is first. We'll be thinking and sharing with our clients some of these second-tier destinations as we move forward from this.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Let's see. Jim Fox, were you able to rejoin us? I know you were having some technical difficulties.
I did. Thank you. I got back on, Mike.
Wonderful.
I'm not sure if you can see me or not, but hopefully you can hear me.
Okay. We can hear you.
Good. All right. So starting with sourcing, in the RFP process, we recommend sending a risk and safety assessment to your vendors, specifically hotels and DMCs, to understand their processes and procedures during an emergency. This is likely a document you already have in place, but we now feel this needs to be updated to include some specific COVID-19 questions. This will ensure that the destinations and properties that you're considering will provide a safe, healthy, and hygienic environment for your attendees. Some of the questions that you might want to include: what are their sanitizing and cleaning practices in guest rooms and public spaces? Does the destination have quality health care to handle COVID-19? What are the number of reported cases in that specific destination? And what measures is the hotel taking to ensure that their employees are coming back to work healthy and not able to spread the virus any further? When researching properties, we recommend looking for opportunities where you can do a private buyout, specifically smaller properties that will give you more control and less variables. And with regards to hotel contracts and force majeure, which I think is something we're all very familiar with right now, we are finding that most hotel brands and DMCs are offering more flexibility than just force majeure in terms of moving dates and deposits with very small penalties. In general, most are going above and beyond than what is stated in the contracts to help our clients, and we feel that that trend will likely continue. So moving to meet smaller. Obviously, meeting in smaller groups is going to be perceived as being safer. Perhaps instead of doing a meeting of 300, a sales kickoff or corporate meeting of 300, shift to 3 groups of 100 or even smaller. Splitting the meeting out by regions or districts would make it possible for some of your attendees to drive if they're still uncomfortable flying. You could have these meetings happen simultaneously, where you could have one general session that is telecast to all locations, and this way everyone can experience your keynote speaker, as well as giving senior leadership the opportunity to address the company all at one time. One drawback to this is that it will impact your budget significantly. You're obviously having, if you've got 4 meetings, you've got 4 AV setups versus just 1. Another option would be a little more cost effective, would be to have the meeting in one location, but to do it in waves with smaller groups of people. And that should not be too much more than if you had just held it all at one time. For breakout sessions, consider having the attendees stay in the room and have the speakers rotate. We actually did this for a conference earlier this year, pre-COVID-19, but it was necessary for how the client wanted to do this, and it worked really well. This would be suitable for a corporate meeting, but not necessarily a user conference where each individual might have a different learning track and have signed up for sessions that are more specific to their job. For user conferences, one thing you might want to consider is to have these sessions recorded and have a pay-per-view at a later date. Obviously, having a camera operator and an audio tech in each room can be very expensive, but charging a fee to view these recorded sessions would help to offset some of those costs down the road. Of course, virtual meetings and hybrid meetings are always an option, and we will be discussing that in the next few minutes. Another thing we need to talk about is meeting space and meeting room setup. We are going to need to be very creative and resourceful to accommodate for physical distancing. Without question, more space is going to be required to do this. We're currently working with the Cosmopolitan in Vegas for a conference this fall, and Victor Chang with PSAB was gracious enough to help me with this diagram yesterday, wanting to illustrate to you what the physical distancing will do to our room capacities. So the first diagram there, you can see that is that 3 per 6 foot table to the room, maximum capacity of 528 people. And now if we were to do this at 1 per 6 foot, you are going to get 176 people in that room. So I had also had him do this in theater style, and the percentage, the ratio was about the same. It was about a 30% capacity of what the room would hold. So as you can see, the whole idea of meeting smaller may truly be the only option, a way to go, because with the existing space that you have, room capacities are going to be significantly reduced. And a few more miscellaneous items just to close on this topic. It goes without saying that hand sanitizing stations need to be everywhere. We're already seeing ads. I've gotten several emails with companies that are branding the sanitizing station, so that's another opportunity for branding. Excuse me. Meeting rooms will need to be sanitized in between use, so longer break periods are going to be necessary to accomplish this. No more 5 or 10 minute breaks. I think they're going to need to be more 20-minute breaks at least to allow the hotel to accommodate that. In high-rise hotels, you might need elevator monitors, so there's not so many hands on the buttons. I have seen this before. And obviously plenty of signage to direct the flow of hallways to prevent congestion. Another thing to think about, if you have ever had roommate pairings, those are now going to be a thing of the past. I don't think we're going to be able to ask our attendees to pair up in the current situation. Hopefully we'll get back to normal on some of these, but for now I believe that's how it's going to have to be.
Good. So we're about the halfway point. I didn't say this at the beginning, but we'll probably run the full 30 minutes with the content, but our team will stay over for questions. Julie.
Yeah, looking at new ways to meet, I think prior to COVID-19, we were already talking about different types of meeting experiences, from, mixed seating to second tier destinations. And I think COVID will probably expedite some of these trends. We've all likely heard of bleisure, which is business mixed with leisure type experiences. And this, as people want to get out and start traveling again, this may become more relevant now than it was when we first started talking about it. So, we had heard last year that 88% of business travelers say that, their job related travel affects their overall satisfaction with their job. So, that kind of shows that where we host our meetings really does matter. And still maybe focusing on those second tier cities like Michael talked about, and just ensuring that we're still really providing a high quality experience for our attendees. And then while we're on site, we can make social distancing feel a little bit more normal if we can find creative ways to offer room setups with some fun mixed seating. You can see a couple examples here. And then when we're looking for alternative ways to engage, groups outside of the meeting rooms, maybe, instead of packing large groups into a bar for a cocktail reception, we consider setting up, more intimate areas for smaller groups to gather, which actually really promotes more meaningful connections anyway. So I know none of this is really new information, but I think today it's really more about redirecting attention or introducing a diversion to make kind of the next normal feel a little bit more normal, at least in the short term.
Yeah, Julie, I really like that concept of redirection and changing people's focus. So that's good. Let's see. Then we go to food and some of the ways we're hearing about that food will have to change.
I'm trying to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Can. Very good.
Okay. So yes, food and beverage is definitely an area where we are going to see some change moving forward. Most of these items were covered last week in our incentive travel webinar, but a few additions have been made to apply to meetings. Room service for breakfast is probably one of the safest ideas to reduce the number of times you bring the group together. Depending on the size of the group, this could put a strain on the hotel, but with the right planning, I think it could be done. Box lunches are always an option. I do believe buffets are still possible, but will look very different. They will be single-sided with hotel staff serving, so less people touching utensils. This will cause lines to back up, especially if we must keep physical distancing. So an alternative could be to have more stations available and section off the tables, assigning them to specific stations. In addition, keeping less food on display and replenishing often would help limit the amount of food touched and possible contamination. No more butler passed hors d'oeuvres or self-serve stations for receptions. Again, waiters will have to be serving your selection. Plated dinners are, again, probably the easiest solution for service, but not always ideal for the attendees, as it does limit their options. Having more bars at the receptions and evening events will help to space people out and prevent crowding and congregating. Another thing to think of, typical items such as salt and pepper shakers, sugar holders, condiments, salad dressings, etc. will no longer be a part of the table setup. Rather, attendees will have to ask the waiter for those items. The waiter will bring them, take them away, and they'll have to be sanitized in between guest use. Coffee breaks will need to be prepackaged items such as chips, nuts, candy bars, yogurt, granola bars, ice cream bars. You know, fruit cookies are always going to be on a coffee break, but I think they're going to need to be individually wrapped so that they stay uncontaminated, and hotel servers are likely going to need to be at the break areas as well, just to assist with service of beverages as well as snacks. As mentioned last week, many of these changes, you know, all occurred during the SARS outbreak. I'm sure many of us have been through that and know, but my hope is that eventually these will get back to normal practices, but for the foreseeable future right now, I do believe we'll be seeing these changes.
Good. Thank you very much, Kim. Now we go to what we're calling less social events. So, Julie?
Yeah, thanks. You know, one of the surveys I referenced earlier found that 58% of people said that they'd be comfortable and more likely to attend a meeting if there was social distancing that was enforced. So it's going to require a little bit of creativity for our welcome receptions and other gatherings, you know, that we do outside of general sessions. So, you know, obviously for meals, we're going to need to lower the number of attendees at our rounds, going maybe down to as few as 4, and also look for alternative seating options like this serpentine setup that you see here with kind of the distance seating to help provide some of that more personal space. For receptions and other common areas, you know, I think that the 2 main trends that we're going to see will be around staggering and kind of the return of this pod concept we were talking about for the last couple of years. So, you know, with a focus on staggering entry into larger group event spaces, I think we're going to see these holding areas pop up that are, you know, created to minimize the congregating in groups and kind of allow for a controlled flow into the events. So this first diagram here, you see this back-to-back seating that really kind of allows for a maximum space efficiency, and then, you know, provides an open concept area where you're not face-to-face, you know, talking to people directly. We could also utilize plexiglass dividers, and, you know, we could brand them and make them fun to kind of allow for more minimizing of contact. I think in common spaces, we'll see more individual lounge seating spread out with tables and even ottomans you can see there, just kind of used as barriers for kind of crowd control. The green, excuse me, the green tables that you see here are individual charging stations, which I think will be utilized, you know, to limit the contact of shared spaces. A couple more examples here. You know, in particular, this white chair is kind of like an individual setup, which has its own swivel table that can be used for an eating or a writing surface, as well as built-in power. You know, I think in a perfect world, we'd all love to fill our networking events with this type of solution, and it appears that the options will be available because we're seeing all kinds of new things pop up. But most of these do have a pretty pricey, you know, a pretty hefty price tag on them. And this is kind of a line item we've never even had to take into consideration before. So I think it's going to be important. It's going to take a lot of thought and effort to make sure we get this piece right. And I came across this photo when I was putting together my part of the deck, and maybe I was feeling a little passive aggressive, but this kind of felt right at the time. Like, well, and if worse comes to worse, we'll put them in huge balloons and not allow them close to each other. We're probably not recommending this, but I thought it added a little levity.
Yeah, good. Well, let's see. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about exhibits, maybe not the massive trade shows, but exhibits that could occur or demos that would occur within a corporate event. So, Julie?
Yeah, well, we'll touch in just a second on virtual events, but while many of our meetings have had to pivot to that formula, a lot of our events still include those smaller exhibit or demonstration demo, kind of elements, and those have different needs. So most of these are very hands-on and tactile, and they include elements that are really hard to reproduce, even under the best virtual reality settings. So, many of the new normal exhibit setups will be similar to what we're seeing with meeting rooms, but I think traffic flow will be more of a focus. So I think we'll see everything from one-way aisles to increased space between booths for demos, scheduling of one-on-one appointments with kind of that no physical contact policy, meaning we'll all be doing like that elbow bump thing we've become so familiar with. I think we'll see, a lot of the floor distancing markers get creative with themed or branded images on them. And in the short term, we're likely to see those, phone pop sockets replaced by spray sanitizer and other hygiene-related giveaways. I think, like myself, many of you will probably plan to be in Frankfurt this week for IMEX. And when I think of the number of people, the sheer volume that they pack onto those trade show floors, it's almost impossible to imagine those large scale, of trade shows coming back anytime soon. But good news is that in China and in South Korea this week, both opened huge exhibit trade shows. So it'll be a little longer for us, but I really do think it's just a matter of time. These will be back.
Good. So we did want to definitely talk about virtual, but what we said here is yes, virtual, but not bad virtual. And I feel like every day we hear a webinar and we see an article that predicts the death of face-to-face meetings, that virtual will replace face-to-face. But I feel like I've heard that every decade, in 1990, 2000, 2010, as video conferencing technology came out, as many of the tools came out 10 and 15 years ago that we're using now. And those of us that have been in the industry remember hearing those same predictions. So while that does seem like something necessary to do in the short term, again, we said temporary, that I think virtual is going to be more of a temporary. We're seeing a lot of those studies, like Julie highlighted at the beginning, where 94% of people would love to get back together at events. We're human beings that desire people-to-people connection. So while we do virtual, two sections of tips here. Virtual is good for short meetings. It's good for small meetings. Once we get over about 25 faces on our screen, the dynamic changes. As we know, we start talking over each other. We're reluctant to interact. Also, it's a lot to sit in a virtual meeting for more than 1 hour. So short and small is good. If we do it, our admonitions would be to invest. Invest in high quality graphic design, have a designer clean up your slides, invest in videos that you use to break up the flow, and then make sure that you're having high quality production as the size of the audience grows. Then, of course, apps. We've been at a tipping point. Michael, I think you got a couple of points for us about apps.
Yeah, none of us are early adopters here. We've been using apps, most all of us, for 5-6 years or more. We're going to be looking, as Kim and Julie have done such a great job, looking to be more contactless, but more contactless. I think contactless is what we're going to be thinking about. So these apps, we're all carrying the smartphone app, with our favorite apps. So to have an app which will allow us to reduce the amount of handouts and paper and contact less with the attendee, I think we're going to see really probably the final phase of adoption here. If you're worried about engagement, just quickly, we did an internal training. I'll give a shout out to Haley Thomas, our senior program manager, who is our subject matter expert on apps. And so this was my takeaway from the hour training session this morning. adoption. Cvent, who we all know is gobbled up all the app providers now, has shared that 64% engagement when you have an app. Your attendees are going to 64% of the time engage through the app. Top performers are up to 94%. In Brightspot, we monitor our clients' attendee engagement, and we come in about 75%. So on our way to that 90%, with some clients definitely there. So don't worry about employee engagement. Think of the benefits here, and I think this is probably what will be the final straw for keeping us absolutely prepared.
Good. So the final one, everybody wonders, what is this going to cost? And we're going to mention here the pluses and the minuses. And Kim Fox, I think you've got the plus side.
Yes, I do. So safety is definitely going to come at a cost, and expenses will increase because of that. Obviously, transportation costs are going to increase with doing fewer people per vehicle. Larger meeting and banquet space is going to be needed to allow for fewer people at tables. More tables mean more linen and centerpieces. More staff is going to be required to ensure that the vendors and hotels are following appropriate standards for cleaning and sanitation. And more hotel staff will be required for events. You know, I do think we're going to see menu prices increase to cover this cost, or potentially a labor or setup cost will increase for the hotel to be able to cover these incremental costs.
Yeah, and I know we're running low on time. I was going to cover the attendance shrink. So we're also going to see that attendance shrink. You saw it in a couple earlier slides. We're not just predicting this is going to happen. I'm actually having conversations with clients earlier this week where we're taking larger trips and breaking them into smaller trips to control the ability with that group to have less contact with larger numbers of people. So we are going to see a reduced headcount with the budgets increasing.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, with that, that completes our 12 expectations. We're going to take Q&A here. As a reminder, you can find the balloon and send in your Q&A. While you're sending that in, and our team is summarizing the question, a few summary takeaways for today. First, I really encourage everybody to focus on consumer psyche. I don't think the industry is talking as much about that in terms of when are your team members going to be comfortable traveling? When are the families of your team members going to be comfortable with their loved ones traveling? The other one is engagement still matters. And engagement is the reason we do face-to-face meetings. It's the reason I believe face-to-face will return once everybody gets comfortable with traveling again. And then a big one I see is make decisions in 30, 60, 90-day time horizons. One of the things that, you know, I just sort of shook my head at was when Mark Zuckerberg, for all his billions and all his intelligence, said that Facebook would not have any face-to-face meetings larger than 50 people all the way through June of next year. You know, this thing could be completely gone by the first of the year. So why make a statement that far out? So we're talking to our clients about when do we need to make these decisions and still allow time for notification and travel and all that. So we're now reached the Q&A. Michael Pasturzi, our marketing manager, is going to summarize some of these for us. So Michael, what do we have?
All right, first up, we have how do airlines justify stating one set of guidelines they will abide, but then actually flights are seriously full, no empty seats, so they're just packing them in.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I took a flight this week. Guess depending on if your definition or my definition of whether it's essential or non-essential, but I made a flight this week, and the flight was about 50% full, so it was much fuller. It was an American Airlines flight, so it was during the period that American said everybody needs to wear masks. But I noticed even today that American was softening their stance and saying that, well, you know, they're going to de-escalate tension if somebody wants to protest wearing a mask, or the mask that people wear during boarding and deplaning. And Michael, I think you shared a stat about what capacity American said they would operate at. Do y'all remember that?
Yeah, I think it was 85%.
Yeah, so, you know, as the planes fill up, they're gonna take more of those planes off the parking lot and put them back into the air. So they need more passengers for more revenue. So I think we'll see capacity on the airline start to grow again.
Yeah, I think,
Michael,
Julie, maybe you could speak to the waivers and disclaimers and capturing, some of that on the front end of the registration process.
Yeah, did you say Julie?
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, so we are asking more medical related questions when we relaunch registration or we launch new registration sites for programs. That can be a privacy concern. So we have come up with a waiver that it has been approved by a couple of our clients that we're asking people to sign off on, just, kind of a limit of liability. And we are trying to walk that fine line between not scaring people, but still covering ourselves and our clients, in the event that somebody would get sick, and then just sharing more information on what the hotels are doing to keep things clean and safe, and how we would handle, on-site preparedness if, somebody should start to become ill and things like that. So happy to share any more of that information with anybody who's looking for similar ideas.
Michael Pasturzi.
Okay, let's see. Another question, do you think groups are going to be willing to travel with the 6-foot distancing guidelines still in place?
I'll jump in. I think what's going to happen is it probably just gets to people's personal passion for travel and how much of an active traveler they have been. The more they've traveled in the past, I predict they will bounce back quicker. The less they travel, I think it's going to take them even longer to get comfortable. We saw that after 9/11. I believe the same trend will repeat itself. History tends to repeat itself as a common lesson. Michael, while you're looking that up, I did notice several people asking questions about the slide deck, and we will provide a PDF copy of the slides afterwards. We're also going to post a blog that is kind of a summary of the content that we presented here, and then we'll have an audio recording, I believe, that we put on YouTube, and we'll send that link as well. I saw a couple of comments that people wanted to share with their team members, so that's nice.
Let's see, another question. For the future groups that are definite and the likelihood of reduced attendance, are customers expecting hotels to waive attrition?
Michael or Julie, you've been on the front line of talking to many, many clients for the last 60 days about attrition.
Yeah.
We are addressing that in some of the replanning we're doing in the addendums in a way that would kind of find that balance between putting up a registration and not having enough people to come to actually warrant the meeting. So whether that's 30% or 50%, we have seen that hotels have acquiesced to some of that verbiage.
I will say that on the hotels that we are rebooking with, it's been much more of a struggle to get them to waive attrition than to get them to rebook the program with zero fees. We're asking the question. I think I've seen 50-50. I've seen some hotels that say, we gave you a deal and we worked with you, and now we've got to protect what revenue we have coming up, and others who have been more willing. So think it's kind of 50-50, I would say.
Yeah. I know I will applaud the hotel industry. The norm in the past had been allowing people to move maybe within 6 months or within the current fiscal year, but by and large, most hotels are letting people move out of the fiscal year into another, and many of them have allowed companies to move quicker than when a force majeure clause kicked in that restricted travel to their destination. So, for those of us that are planners, I think those are the things that create loyalty with brands, and those are things that we will remember in the days ahead. So, I would say a big thank you to any hotels that are on the line.
All right, on that note, we have another question here. Smaller properties like boutique hotels were mentioned, so variables are reduced. Their meeting room capacity, if any, would suffer as it reduces further. What's your thought on that? Is there going to be enough meeting room capacity to keep up even with this limited attendance?
Yeah, that feels like that'll be a little bit tricky because, the boutique hotels often appeal more to leisure travelers and therefore they have less meeting space. But there are some, particularly within region, like within North America, that put a focus on meetings. And I believe if we get creative, as Kim Fox said, and maybe break up the meetings a bit into smaller meetings, that we can figure out how to make properties work. But yeah, it is that will be a little bit of a tight squeeze at times to find the right size boutique hotel with the right number of sleeping rooms and the right square footage of capacity.
Yeah, also one thing I want to say on that too, Mike, is, typically hotels, you've got a ratio to your number of guest rooms to the amount of meeting space that they want to give you. And I think we're going to have to see some flexibility on that because I think we're going to need more meeting space than guest rooms typically would allow. So that will be something interesting to see how hotels will work with us on that moving forward.
Let's see, Michael, do you see anything else in the chat feed?
I think we
glancing
have
through, I
one
don't know.
more.
Okay.
One more good one. All right, so what are the questions you as experts are asking during these troubling times?
Wow. Well, first, we're very flattered that somebody calls us experts. So that's, did you send in that question, Michael? Just kidding. Let's see, Kim Fox, you kind of ran through a couple of those questions in the sourcing section about safety practices and risk management and cleaning and sanitation. What else would you add?
I didn't hear, Michael, could you repeat the question again?
Sorry. What are the questions that you as an expert are asking during these times?
Hey, and Kim Fox, sorry, I think I just saw a clarification of the question that it is more about what questions are we putting on the registration site. So maybe I'll direct that to Julie, because on our last webinar, Julie, you commented about some of the extra questions that we will be asking on registration.
Yeah, a lot of them are health related. A lot are not a lot, because I'm going to say, we originally, when we started looking at this, we started to ask a lot of these health questions. And then we thought, if people respond that they are at greater risk or they do feel uncomfortable traveling, what will we do with that information? And, at the end of the day, we're not going to tell them they can't come on the trip or those kind of things. So I think a lot of the questions that we were asking have become
Let's see, we may have lost audio there for a second.
There might be some connectivity issues there, but
Well,
Another good example of why these virtual meetings will never replace that face-to-face.
Health questions and adding extra health disclosures. And I know Michael even kind of mentioned those extra disclosures, such as what the hotel's cleaning practices are, sanitation practices, what the expectations are in the meeting that could occur both on the registration site as well as the app. Michael, let's see, while I have the microphone, I noticed one other chat question that came in that said, where did the opinion come for not taking temperatures? And I will say that opinion is my own, and that's more of a pragmatic basis. We certainly see Dr. Fauci's guidelines and the CDC's guidelines about taking temperatures. I do think we'd like to see hotels taking the temperature of their staff. But my personal opinion is if we're in an environment where we would need to be taking temperatures on site, before people got their name badge or before they walked into a general session. And if that's still the environment, I think we're just going to see a low percentage of people that are going to be willing to attend the meeting. And I think we'll see company organizers who decide to postpone the event, as they have even, in the short term now. So it is more of a personal opinion. Well, Michael and our team, I know we're about 15 minutes over. We tried to rush through that content, so we really appreciate everybody's attention today. It flatters us that you share your time with us. We did put a lot of effort into this presentation with our reimagined teams internally at Brightspot that came up with this content. And as I mentioned at the beginning, next week on Thursday, we're going to have another webinar on the next normal for roadshows. I do predict that's going to be a big trend that we see at the back half of this year, as companies have been hunkered down in the first half, as public trade shows have been canceled, that people are going to see a need to get in front of their customers and prospects and to market their products, and that what they may do is small regional shows or local market events that occur in large metropolitan cities. Maybe they'll be lunch and learn, maybe they'll be half-day events, but they'll be smaller events, and effectively it's going to trade a public trade show for a private trade show. So with that, I think we will adjourn this session and watch for emails coming from our team that will have slide decks, we'll have our blog, as well as an audio of today's session. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe and stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.